What if I told you that in 1891 a woman gave birth to twins from two different fathers, and science didn't have an explanation until 1995? This is the true story that shook the foundations of the Old South and challenged everything we thought we knew about human biology. A story of forbidden love, impossible science, and secrets that haunted a family for over a century. If this story intrigues you, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon, because today we're diving deep into one of the most scandalous and scientifically fascinating cases in American history. The Georgia heat hung thick as molasses over Magnolia Grove Plantation, where the Langford family had ruled over their cotton empire for 3 generations. The white-columned mansion stood like a monument to Southern aristocracy, its wraparound porches offering little relief from the suffocating humidity. Lady Eleanor Langford sat in her ornate wooden chair on the main veranda, her dark velvet dress a stark contrast to the bright summer day. At 26, she possessed the refined beauty expected of a plantation mistress: pale skin protected from the sun, dark hair perfectly arranged, and an air of quiet dignity that masked the growing turmoil beneath the surface. The Langford plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of prime Georgia farmland, worked by over 200 enslaved people. Cotton was king here, and Charles Langford III was its undisputed ruler. The family's wealth had been built on generations of enslaved labor, creating unimaginable luxury for the white family while perpetuating unthinkable suffering for those who served them. "The heat is unbearable today," Eleanor murmured to her husband, Charles Langford, who stood beside her in his formal dark suit. Despite the temperature, Charles maintained his appearance as befitted a gentleman: full beard, meticulously groomed, waistcoat pressed, and gold pocket watch chain gleaming. Charles was a man of 32, tall and imposing, with the kind of presence that commanded respect. He had inherited not only his father's plantation, but also his rigid beliefs about social order and racial hierarchy. To Charles, the plantation was not just a business, it was a sacred trust passed down through generations. "Indeed, my dear," Charles replied, his voice carrying the measured tone of a man accustomed to authority. "Perhaps you should retire indoors. The sun is no friend to delicate constitutions such as yours." To Eleanor's right stood Samuel Washington, the family's head butler, a man whose presence had become as constant as the ticking of the grandfather clock. At 28, Samuel was tall and lean, with intelligent dark eyes and hands that moved with careful precision. Samuel's formal attire mirrored that of his master: dark suit, crisp white shirt, and black bow tie, yet the careful distance he maintained spoke volumes about the rigid social boundaries that governed their world. He had been born on the plantation and groomed to take over his father's position. But Samuel was different. He could read and write, skills acquired in secret through years of careful observation. "Shall I prepare some lemonade, ma'am?" Samuel asked, his voice respectful yet warm, in a way that made Eleanor's heart skip slightly. "That would be lovely, Samuel. Thank you." As Samuel departed for the kitchen, Eleanor felt the familiar flutter in her chest that had been growing stronger over the past months. It was wrong, she knew. Everything about her feelings towards Samuel violated every rule of her upbringing. Yet in the quiet moments when their eyes met, she felt more alive than she had in years of marriage to Charles. The plantation house was a testament to Langford wealth and power. Built in Greek Revival style, it featured massive white columns, soaring ceilings, and rooms filled with European furniture. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on walls, lined with portraits of Langford ancestors. Eleanor's own background was equally prestigious. Born Eleanor Beaumont in Charleston, she was the daughter of a wealthy rice planter who had arranged her marriage to Charles for business reasons. The union had joined two of the most powerful families in Georgia, but Eleanor had always been different from other plantation mistresses. She read voraciously, often borrowing books from Charles's library. She had opinions about politics and social issues that she kept carefully hidden. Most dangerously, she had begun to question the very foundations of the world she had been born into. Charles remained oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around his household. His attention was focused on cotton prices, the upcoming harvest, and maintaining social standing. Eleanor was his wife, beautiful and proper, a perfect ornament to his success. That she might have desires beyond her role never crossed his mind. Samuel occupied a unique position in the plantation hierarchy. As head butler, he held authority over the other house servants, managing everything from meal service to mansion maintenance. His intelligence and secret education set him apart from others in his position. "The cotton looks promising this year," Charles observed as he gazed out over the fields where dozens of workers moved between the rows. "Yes, sir," Eleanor replied automatically, though her thoughts were elsewhere. She found herself watching Samuel through the window as he moved through the house, his tall frame carrying itself with dignity that transcended his station. The afternoon brought visitors, as was common during summer months. Neighboring plantation owners came to discuss business with Charles, their wives joining Eleanor for tea and gossip. The conversation inevitably turned to usual topics: weather, cotton crop, latest fashions, and maintaining proper control over their enslaved workforce. "I heard the Pemberton place had some trouble last month," Mrs. Whitmore confided over her teacup. "One of their field hands tried to run away. They caught him, of course, but it's always unsettling." Eleanor felt her stomach tighten at the casual discussion of human suffering, but she maintained composure. "How terrible," she murmured. As visitors departed in late afternoon, Eleanor found herself alone with her thoughts. She walked through the house, ostensibly checking dinner preparations, but really seeking glimpses of Samuel as he went about his duties. "Is everything satisfactory for dinner, Mom?" he asked, looking up from polishing silver. "Yes, Samuel. Everything is always perfect when you're in charge." Their eyes met across the polished mahogany table, and Eleanor felt that familiar electric current. Samuel's hands stilled on the silver serving tray, and for a moment the careful boundaries seemed to waver. "Mom," Samuel said softly, his voice carrying a note of longing. "Yes? Is there anything else you need?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning neither dared acknowledge directly. Eleanor felt her heart racing as she looked into Samuel's dark eyes. "No," she whispered finally. "Nothing else." But as she turned to leave, she heard Samuel's voice behind her, so quiet she almost missed it. "If there ever is, Ma'am, anything at all, you need only ask." Eleanor paused in the doorway, not trusting herself to look at him again, but she nodded slightly before hurrying away. The evening brought little relief from the heat. The family gathered for dinner in the formal dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on walls lined with ancestral portraits. Samuel served each course with practiced precision, but Eleanor found herself acutely aware of every time he came near her chair. "I received word from Atlanta today," Charles announced as he carved the roast. "The Pemberton family will be visiting next month. It's important that everything be perfect for their arrival." "Of course, dear," Eleanor responded, though she felt a knot forming in her stomach. The Pembertons were old family friends who would scrutinize every detail of their visit. As Samuel refilled her wineglass, their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. The contact sent electricity through Eleanor's entire body, and she saw in Samuel's eyes that he felt it too. It was a moment that lasted no more than a heartbeat, yet it changed everything between them. That night, as Eleanor lay in her separate bedroom, she stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her feelings. She had been raised to believe her role was clear, to be a dutiful wife, to bear children, to maintain social graces. Yet here she was, consumed by thoughts of a man whose existence was supposed to be invisible. The photograph that would later capture this moment, Eleanor seated with two infants, flanked by both Charles and Samuel, seemed impossible in the summer of 1891. Yet the seeds of that impossible moment were already being planted in the sultry Georgia heat, watered by forbidden glances and nurtured by the complex dynamics that no amount of social convention could suppress. As August melted into September, the oppressive heat began to give way to autumn's first hints, but the tension at Magnolia Grove only intensified. The cotton was nearly ready for harvest, and the plantation buzzed with anticipation of another profitable season. Yet beneath this well-ordered world, dangerous currents were gathering strength. Eleanor had taken to walking in the garden behind the main house in early morning hours, when dew still clung to magnolia blossoms and the air carried freshness that would soon be burned away. These solitary walks had become her refuge, a time when she could escape suffocating expectations and simply exist as herself. The garden was a masterpiece of southern landscaping, designed by Eleanor's mother-in-law. Winding paths led through carefully arranged beds of roses, camellias, and azaleas, while ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss provided shade. A small gazebo sat at the garden's heart, surrounded by jasmine vines that filled the air with intoxicating fragrance. It was during one of these walks that Samuel approached her, carrying a basket of fresh flowers for house arrangements. He had been timing his garden duties to coincide with Eleanor's morning walks, though he told himself it was merely coincidence. "Good morning, Mrs. Langford," he said, his voice carefully neutral, despite the way his pulse quickened. Eleanor turned at the sound of his voice, and Samuel felt his breath catch. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the morning light, her dark hair loosely arranged rather than in elaborate styles. She looked younger, more natural, and infinitely more beautiful. "Good morning, Samuel." Eleanor's voice was soft, almost breathless. "The roses are particularly beautiful this year." "Yes, ma'am. Old Moses has done exceptional work." Samuel set down his basket and began cutting fresh blooms. "Though I believe beauty is often found in the most unexpected places." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither dared acknowledge directly. Eleanor stepped closer, ostensibly to examine the flowers, but really to be near him. She could smell the clean scent of his soap, could see how morning light played across his strong hands. "Samuel," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the thoughts consuming her. "Ma'am, do you ever wonder about different lives, about what might be possible if circumstances were different?" Samuel's hands stilled on the roses. The question was dangerous territory, yet he found himself unable to resist answering honestly. "Every day, ma'am, every single day." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the careful barriers they had maintained began to crumble. Eleanor reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand as he held a white rose. The touch was electric, forbidden, and absolutely undeniable. "We shouldn't," Samuel whispered, though he made no move to pull away. "I know," Eleanor replied, her voice barely audible, "but I can't stop thinking about you." The confession hung between them, like a bridge neither could cross back over. They stood frozen in that moment, aware that everything was about to change, yet powerless to stop it. It was Samuel who finally stepped back, his training and survival instincts overriding his heart. "Mrs. Langford, this is dangerous. For both of us." Eleanor nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," Samuel said gently. "Never apologize for speaking truth." From that day forward, their interactions took on new intensity. Every shared glance, every brief conversation, Every moment when Samuel served dinner or brought Eleanor her morning tea became charged with unspoken emotion. They were walking a tightrope over an abyss. Eleanor found herself making excuses to be in parts of the house where Samuel was working. She would linger in the library when he was dusting books, or find reasons to check dining room preparations when he was setting the table. Each encounter was brief and proper, yet filled with electricity that left her breathless. Samuel began to anticipate Eleanor's movements through the house. He would time his duties to coincide with her daily routines, stealing moments of her presence like a man dying of thirst, stealing drops of water. He memorized the sound of her footsteps, the rustle of her skirts, the particular way she said his name. Charles remained oblivious to the drama unfolding under his roof. His days were consumed with business, meetings with other plantation owners, correspondence with cotton buyers, and endless details of managing a large agricultural operation. Eleanor was his wife, beautiful and proper, and he assumed her contentment naturally. "The Pemberton visit is confirmed for October," Charles announced one evening over dinner. "Margaret Pemberton specifically requested to see you, my dear. She's quite eager to discuss the latest fashions from Atlanta." "How lovely," Eleanor replied, though the thought of entertaining guests while her heart was in such turmoil filled her with dread. Samuel, serving the evening meal, caught the slight tremor in her voice. Their eyes met briefly across the dining room, and he saw the distress she was trying so hard to hide. Later that evening, as the house settled into nightly quiet, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She wandered to the library, hoping that reading might calm her restless mind. She was surprised to find a lamp already burning and Samuel there, carefully dusting the leather-bound volumes. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to retreat. "I didn't know anyone was here." "Please don't go," Samuel said quietly. "I was just finishing up." But instead of leaving, he set down his cloth and turned to face her. In the lamplight, his face showed the same torment that she felt. "This is impossible," Eleanor whispered. "Yes," Samuel agreed, "but that doesn't make it less real." They stood there in the flickering light, two people from different worlds drawn together by something neither could name or deny. The library, with its walls of knowledge and wisdom, seemed to mock the simplicity of their situation. "If things were different," Eleanor began. "But they're not," Samuel finished gently. "And we both know what would happen if anyone discovered how we feel." The unspoken truth hung heavy between them. In 1891, Georgia, a relationship between a white plantation mistress and a black butler was not just socially unacceptable, it was dangerous beyond measure. Samuel could face lynching and Eleanor would be cast out from everything she had ever known. Yet as they stood there in the quiet library, surrounded by accumulated wisdom of centuries, neither could bring themselves to walk away. The heart, it seemed, had its own logic that defied social convention and personal safety. "I should go," Eleanor finally whispered. "Yes," Samuel agreed, but neither moved. Instead, they found themselves drawn closer together, as if by magnetic force beyond their control. Samuel reached out slowly, giving Eleanor every opportunity to pull away, and gently touched her face. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and savoring the warmth of his palm against her cheek. "Eleanor," he whispered, using her first name for the second time. "I know this is wrong," she said, opening her eyes to look into his. "I know it could destroy us both, but I've never felt anything like this before." "Neither have I," Samuel admitted. "I've tried to fight it, tried to convince myself that what I feel isn't real, but every time I see you, every time I hear your voice—" "What are we going to do?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know," Samuel replied honestly, "but I can't pretend anymore that I don't love you." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration that changed everything. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Tears of joy and terror and desperate longing all mixed together. It was the sound of footsteps in the hallway that finally broke the spell. They sprang apart just as Charles appeared in the doorway, his hair dishevelled from sleep. "Eleanor, what are you doing up so late?" "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice remarkably steady. "I thought reading might help." Charles's gaze shifted to Samuel, who had resumed his dusting with practiced nonchalance. "And you, Samuel, working rather late, aren't you?" "Yes, sir. I wanted to finish the library tonight, so it would be perfect for your guests next month." Charles nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Attention to detail is what separates a good household from a great one." As Charles escorted Eleanor back to her room, Samuel remained in the library, his hands shaking as he gripped the dusting cloth. They had come so close to discovery, so close to disaster. Yet even as his rational mind screamed warnings, his heart ached with the knowledge that he was falling deeper in love with a woman he could never have. The autumn air that drifted through open windows carried the scent of change, and with it the promise that the careful order of Magnolia Grove Plantation was about to be shattered forever. October arrived with a crispness that brought relief from summer's oppressive heat, but no relief from the tension that had been building at Magnolia Grove, like pressure in a steam engine. The cotton harvest was in full swing, and the Pemberton family's visit loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. The morning of the Pembertons' arrival, Eleanor stood before her mirror as her lady's maid, Sarah, helped her into her finest dress, a deep blue silk that complemented her dark hair and pale complexion. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Sarah said softly, adjusting the intricate lace at Eleanor's collar. Sarah was a woman of about 40, who had been Eleanor's personal maid since her marriage to Charles. Over the years, she'd become more than a servant. She was a confidant and friend. "Thank you, Sarah." Eleanor's voice was distant, her mind elsewhere. Through her bedroom window, she could see Samuel directing the other servants as they prepared the guest quarters. Even from this distance, she could sense the careful precision with which he moved. Her heart ached with the impossibility of their situation. "Ma'am," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying concern, "are you feeling well? You seem troubled lately." Eleanor met Sarah's eyes in the mirror. The older woman's face showed genuine worry, and Eleanor felt a sudden urge to confess everything. "I'm fine, Sarah, just nervous about the visit." But Sarah had known Eleanor too long to be fooled. She had seen the way her mistress's eyes followed Samuel through the house, had noticed the subtle changes in Eleanor's behavior. As an enslaved woman who had spent her life reading white people's moods for survival, Sarah understood more than Eleanor realized. "Sometimes," Sarah said carefully, "the heart wants what it cannot have. And sometimes that wanting can lead to great joy or great sorrow, depending on the choices we make." Eleanor's hands stilled on her jewelry box. "Sarah, I'm not saying anything, ma'am. Just be careful. Some paths once taken cannot be retraced." The warning was gentle but clear, and Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. If Sarah had noticed her feelings for Samuel, how long before others did as well? The Pembertons arrived in a flurry of carriages and luggage. Their entourage, including not only Margaret and William Pemberton, but also their adult children and several servants. Charles greeted them on the front steps with elaborate courtesy. "William, Margaret, welcome to Magnolia Grove," Charles boomed. William Pemberton was a man of similar age and bearing to Charles, with the same air of confident authority. His wife Margaret was a formidable woman, known throughout Georgia society for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. "Charles, my dear friend," William replied, clasping Charles's hand firmly. "And Eleanor, you look radiant as always." Margaret swept Eleanor into an embrace that felt more like an inspection. "My dear, you simply must tell me about the latest fashions. I've heard the most intriguing things about the new styles from Paris." As the guests settled into the rhythm of plantation hospitality, Eleanor found herself playing her role with practiced perfection. She smiled at appropriate moments, laughed at William Pemberton's stories, and discussed fashion with Margaret with enthusiasm she didn't feel. The Pemberton's son James proved to be everything Charles had promised: handsome, well-educated, and charming. At 25, he had recently completed his studies at the University of Virginia and was being groomed to take over his father's business interests. "Miss Eleanor," James said during their first evening together, "I must say that your garden is absolutely magnificent. Would you do me the honor of showing me around tomorrow morning?" Eleanor felt trapped by social expectations. "Of course, Mr. Pemberton, I would be delighted." But even as she spoke, her eyes sought Samuel across the crowded parlor. He was serving drinks to the gentlemen, moving with usual grace, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Samuel orchestrated the household staff with his usual efficiency. He served meals, managed guest accommodations, and ensured every detail met exacting standards. Yet Eleanor noticed the way his eyes sought hers across crowded rooms, the slight tremor in his hands when he served her tea. The first 2 days passed in a whirlwind of social activities. There were elaborate meals, afternoon teas, evening entertainments, and endless conversations about business, politics, and society. Eleanor performed her role flawlessly, but inside she felt as if she was slowly suffocating. James Pemberton proved to be an attentive companion, clearly smitten with Eleanor despite her married status. His attention was flattering but also uncomfortable, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. It was during the third evening of the visit that everything changed. The men had retired to Charles' study for brandy and cigars, while the ladies gathered in the parlor for tea and gossip. Eleanor excused herself, claiming a headache, and retreated to the garden for air. The October night was cool and clear, with the full moon casting silver light across the carefully manicured grounds. Eleanor walked among the roses, now past their summer bloom, but still fragrant in the crisp air. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Samuel approach until he spoke her name softly. "Mrs. Langford, are you unwell?" She turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, his face etched with concern. In the moonlight, he looked almost ethereal, his dark skin glowing with silver highlights. "I'm fine, Samuel. Just needed some air." "The guests are quite demanding," he observed carefully. Eleanor laughed, a sound that held more sadness than humor. "They're exactly what they've always been. It's I who have changed." Samuel stepped closer, drawn by the pain in her voice. "Ma'am, I can't do this anymore, Samuel. I can't pretend that everything is normal when my heart is breaking." The words hung in the moonlit air between them, a confession that changed everything. Samuel looked around quickly, ensuring they were alone, then moved closer still. "Eleanor," he whispered, using her first name for the third time. The sound of it on his lips sent shivers through her entire body. "I know it's impossible," she continued, tears beginning to flow. "I know we can never be together, but I can't stop loving you." Samuel's resolve, carefully maintained for months, finally crumbled. He reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away her tears with his thumb. "I love you too," he whispered. "God help me, I love you too." They stood there in the moonlight, two people from different worlds, united by an emotion that transcended every barrier society had placed between them. When Samuel leaned down to kiss her, Eleanor didn't pull away. Instead, she melted into his embrace, feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she belonged. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they both feared that too much passion might shatter the moment like spun glass. But as Eleanor's arms wound around Samuel's neck and his hands found her waist, the careful restraint they had maintained for so long gave way to months of suppressed longing. "We shouldn't," Samuel whispered against her lips, even as he pulled her closer. "I don't care," Eleanor replied, her voice fierce with determination. "I don't care about anything except this moment." They made love there in the garden, surrounded by the scent of late roses and the silver light of the October moon. It was desperate and tender, passionate and gentle, a joining of not just bodies but souls that had been denied too long. "I love you," she whispered against his chest as they lay entwined afterward. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "And I love you," Samuel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the most beautiful, the most precious thing in my world." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked softly. "I don't know," Samuel replied honestly. "But whatever happens, I'll never regret this night." They both knew that their actions had consequences that extended far beyond their own happiness. In the world of 1891 Georgia, what they had done was not just forbidden, it was dangerous beyond measure. As they reluctantly parted and returned to the house separately, neither could have imagined that their single night of passion would result in the most extraordinary pregnancy in medical history, one that would remain unexplained for over a century. The next morning brought the usual bustle of plantation life, but Eleanor moved through her duties in a daze of happiness and terror. She played the perfect hostess to the Pembertons, smiled at Charles's jokes, and maintained the facade of normalcy while her entire world had shifted on its axis. Samuel, too, performed his duties with customary efficiency, though Eleanor noticed the way his eyes followed her movements, the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth when he thought no one was looking. It was Margaret Pemberton who first noticed the change in Eleanor. "My dear, you're positively glowing," she observed over breakfast. "There's something different about you." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped, but she managed to smile serenely. "It must be the October air. I've always found autumn invigorating." Charles, seated at the head of the table, beamed with pride. "My Eleanor has always been the picture of health and beauty." The Pembertons departed the following day, full of praise for the Langford hospitality and promises to return soon. As their carriages disappeared down the tree-lined drive, Eleanor felt both relief and a strange sense of loss. It was 3 weeks later that Eleanor first suspected she might be pregnant. The signs were subtle at first: a slight nausea in the mornings, an unusual fatigue that seemed to settle into her bones. But as the days passed, the symptoms became more pronounced, and Eleanor found herself facing a terrifying possibility. She was pregnant, but by whom? The timing made it impossible to know whether the father was Charles, with whom she maintained expected marital relations, or Samuel, with whom she had shared that one passionate night in the garden. As Eleanor stood in her bedroom, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, she could never have imagined that she was carrying not one child but two, and that each had a different father. The phenomenon of heteropaternal superfecundation was unknown to medical science in 1891, and would remain a mystery for over a century. The storm that had been building at Magnolia Grove was about to break in ways that no one could have predicted, setting in motion events that would challenge everything the Langford family thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the very nature of human biology itself. November brought the first frost to Magnolia Grove, coating the plantation in crystalline beauty that seemed to mock the turmoil brewing within the main house. Eleanor could no longer deny the reality of her condition. She was pregnant, and the timing made it impossible to determine the father with certainty. Dr. Harrison arrived on a crisp December morning, his black medical bag in hand, and his kind eyes filled with professional concern. Eleanor received him in the parlor, her hands folded carefully to hide their trembling. "Mrs. Langford," Dr. Harrison said gently, settling into the chair across from her. Sarah mentioned that you haven't been feeling well. Perhaps you could describe your symptoms. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to speak. I've been experiencing some morning discomfort and unusual fatigue. Dr. Harrison nodded knowingly. I see. And when did these symptoms begin? About 6 weeks ago, Eleanor replied, the timeline burning in her memory like a brand. Mrs. Langford, based on what you've described, I believe congratulations may be in order. Would you permit me to conduct an examination? The examination confirmed what Eleanor had already suspected, but hoped against. She was indeed pregnant, approximately 8 weeks along. Dr. Harrison's gentle manner made the confirmation bearable, but Eleanor felt as if the world was spinning around her. Everything appears to be progressing normally, Dr. Harrison announced, though I must say, you seem to be showing more than I would expect for this stage. It's possible you may be expecting twins. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. Twins. The possibility had never occurred to her, and now it opened up terrifying new questions. If she was indeed carrying 2 babies, could they have different fathers? The thought seemed impossible, yet the timing made it a horrifying possibility. When Charles learned of the pregnancy, his joy was immediate and overwhelming. He swept Eleanor into his arms with uncharacteristic emotion, his face glowing with pride and happiness. A child! Eleanor, my dear, you've made me the happiest man in Georgia, he exclaimed, an heir to carry on the Langford name. Eleanor managed a weak smile, though inside she felt as if she were drowning. If the baby, or babies, were indeed Charles's, then her night with Samuel would remain a secret. But if one or both children showed signs of mixed parentage, the consequences would be catastrophic. Samuel, who had been hovering discreetly nearby, caught Eleanor's eye over Charles's shoulder. The look they shared was filled with the same terror and uncertainty that had been growing between them for weeks. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed through the winter months, the household buzzed with preparations. Nurseries were prepared, baby clothes were sewn, and the entire plantation seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Eleanor found herself caught between hope and dread. She prayed that the child would clearly be Charles's, ending the uncertainty, but part of her, the part that loved Samuel with desperate intensity, hoped for some sign that their love had created new life. The winter months passed slowly, each day bringing Eleanor closer to the moment of truth. She grew larger with each passing week, and Dr. Harrison's prediction about twins seemed increasingly likely. By March, Eleanor could feel 2 distinct sets of movements within her womb. 2 children, Charles mused one evening as he felt the babies moving. The Langford line will be well secured. Eleanor smiled and nodded, but inside she was terrified. 2 babies meant twice the chance that her secret would be revealed, twice the possibility that her world would come crashing down. Samuel continued to perform his duties with usual efficiency, but Eleanor could see the strain in his face. He had grown thinner over the winter months, and the careful control he maintained over his emotions was clearly taking its toll. Sarah, Eleanor's lady's maid, had become increasingly protective and observant. She seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension in the household. "Ma'am," Sarah said one morning in late April as she helped Eleanor dress, "you need to prepare yourself for whatever comes. Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways, and we must trust in his plan." It was on a humid morning in late May that Eleanor's labor began. She woke before dawn with a sharp pain that took her breath away, followed by another and another. Sarah was immediately at her side. "It's time, ma'am," Sarah said calmly, though Eleanor could see the worry in her eyes. "I'll send for Dr. Harrison and alert Mr. Langford." Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, along with Martha, the plantation's most experienced midwife. Charles paced the halls like a caged animal, while Samuel maintained his duties with mechanical precision, his heart breaking with each cry of pain that echoed from Eleanor's room. The labor was long and difficult. Eleanor, exhausted and terrified, gripped Sarah's hand as another contraction racked her body. Through the haze of pain, she was acutely aware that the next few hours would determine the fate of everyone she loved. "I can see the first baby's head," Dr. Harrison announced after what felt like an eternity. "One more push, Mrs. Langford." With a final tremendous effort, Eleanor delivered her first child, a beautiful baby boy with pale skin and fine, light hair that caught the morning sunlight. The room erupted in celebration as Dr. Harrison cleaned the infant and placed him in Eleanor's arms. "He's perfect," Charles breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Absolutely perfect." Eleanor looked down at the baby in her arms, feeling a rush of love so powerful it took her breath away. This child was clearly Charles's. The resemblance was unmistakable. But Eleanor's labor was far from over. Within minutes, another contraction seized her, stronger than any that had come before. Dr. Harrison realized that the second twin was ready to be born. "Here comes the second baby," he announced, his voice filled with excitement. The second baby emerged with the same ease as the first, but as Dr. Harrison cleaned the infant, his expression changed from joy to confusion, then to something approaching shock. This baby was also a boy, but his skin was noticeably darker, his hair black and curly. The differences were subtle but unmistakable to anyone who looked closely. Where the first baby was clearly of European descent, the second showed mixed heritage that could only mean one thing. The room fell silent except for the cries of the two newborns. Dr. Harrison quickly wrapped the second baby and placed him in Eleanor's other arm. But his mind was racing with possibilities that seemed to defy medical explanation. Charles, still euphoric from the birth of his first son, took a moment to register the differences between the two babies. When he did, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a cold fury that made everyone in the room step back. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. Langford, sometimes twins can have quite different appearances. It's not entirely uncommon for—" "Don't lie to me," Charles interrupted, his eyes fixed on the darker-skinned baby. "I may not be a doctor, but I'm not a fool." Eleanor, exhausted and terrified, clutched both babies to her chest. She could see the rage building in Charles's eyes, could feel the weight of discovery crushing down upon her. "Charles, please," she whispered. "They're both your sons." But Charles was already backing away from the bed, his face a mask of disgust and betrayal. "My sons," he spat. "One of these children is clearly not mine. The question is, who is the father?" His gaze swept the room, taking in Sarah, Dr. Harrison, Martha the midwife, and finally settling on Samuel, who had entered the room to assist with whatever might be needed. The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Samuel stood frozen in the doorway, his face carefully neutral despite the chaos erupting around him. Eleanor's eyes met his across the room, and in that moment, Charles saw everything he needed to know. "You," Charles whispered, his voice filled with venom. "You dare to defile my wife in my own house?" Samuel straightened, his dignity intact even in the face of mortal danger. "Mr. Langford, Get out!" Charles roared. "Get out of my house before I have you hanged from the nearest tree." Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his medical training overriding the social drama. "Mr. Langford, please. Mrs. Langford needs rest, and the babies need care. Whatever personal matters need to be resolved can wait until—" "There is nothing to resolve," Charles said coldly. "My wife has betrayed me with a slave, and the evidence lies crying in her arms." Eleanor found her voice, weak but determined. "Charles, please, I love you. I love our family. These are both our children, and they deserve—" "They deserve nothing from me," Charles interrupted. "One of them is a bastard, and I'll not have bastards bearing the Langford name." The photograph that would later become the only visual record of this moment was taken 3 days later when a traveling photographer arrived to capture what was supposed to be a joyous family portrait. Instead, it captured a moment frozen in time. Eleanor seated with both babies, flanked by Charles and Samuel, all of them bound together by secrets and consequences that would echo through the generations. Charles, for all his rage, was a practical man. Divorce was unthinkable for a family of their social standing, and the scandal would ruin them all. Instead, he chose a different path, one of cold silence and careful control. Samuel was not hanged or beaten, as might have been expected. Instead, Charles made it clear that he was to remain on the plantation, to serve as a constant reminder of Eleanor's shame. It was a punishment more cruel than violence. Eleanor named the boys Thomas and William. Thomas for the lighter-skinned child who clearly resembled Charles, and William for the darker baby whose parentage remained officially unquestioned but privately understood. As the boys grew, the differences between them became more pronounced, creating a constant source of tension within the Langford household. Thomas developed his father's strong jaw and piercing blue eyes, his fair hair catching the sunlight. William's features showed a subtle blend of Eleanor's delicate bone structure and something else, something that reminded everyone of Samuel's quiet dignity and intelligent dark eyes. The family lived in a state of suspended animation, maintaining the facade of normalcy while navigating complex emotions and unspoken truths. Charles treated both boys as his sons in public, ensuring they received proper education and privileges. But in private, his coldness toward William was unmistakable. Eleanor loved both children fiercely, but she carried the weight of her secret like a stone in her chest. She watched Samuel from a distance as he went about his duties, saw the way his eyes lingered on William during family gatherings, and felt her heart break a little more each day. The plantation continued to operate as it always had, but the dynamics within the main house had shifted irrevocably. Samuel performed his duties with the same efficiency as always, but there was a sadness in his bearing that hadn't been there before. He aged rapidly in the years following the twins' birth. Thomas grew into a confident, outgoing child who naturally assumed his place as the heir to the Langford fortune. He was quick to learn, eager to please his father, and showed an early aptitude for plantation management. Charles doted on him, taking him on tours of the fields and teaching him about cotton cultivation and market prices. William, meanwhile, was a more introspective child. He spent hours in the library, reading everything he could find, and showed an artistic sensitivity that set him apart from his brother. He was drawn to music, poetry, and painting, pursuits that Charles viewed with barely concealed disdain. "The boy needs to toughen up," Charles complained to Eleanor one evening when William was 8 years old. "He spends too much time with his books and not enough learning practical skills." "He's intelligent and sensitive," Eleanor defended. "Those are admirable qualities." "They're feminine qualities," Charles retorted. "He needs to learn to be a man." But William's gentle nature was not something that could be changed through harsh treatment. If anything, Charles's coldness only drove the boy to seek comfort elsewhere, often in the company of Samuel, who treated him with a kindness that the child craved. Samuel, bound by the constraints of his position, could never openly acknowledge his paternal feelings toward William, but he found ways to nurture the boy's interests, quietly providing him with books, teaching him about music during stolen moments, and offering the kind of patient guidance that Charles refused to give. Eleanor watched these interactions with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. She could see the bond forming between Samuel and William, could see how much the boy needed that connection, but she was powerless to acknowledge it openly. As the years passed, the secret that bound the three adults together became an increasingly heavy burden. Eleanor aged prematurely under the weight of her guilt and constant tension. Charles grew more rigid and controlling, using his authority to punish both Eleanor and Samuel in subtle but effective ways. And Samuel retreated further into himself, finding solace only in his quiet moments with William. The boys themselves remained largely unaware of the undercurrents that shaped their daily lives. Thomas accepted his father's favoritism as natural, while William learned to navigate the complex emotional landscape with wisdom beyond his years. It was when the boys reached adolescence that the differences between them became impossible to ignore. Thomas shot up in height, developing the broad shoulders and strong build of the Langford men. William, while also tall, had a more slender build and features that were undeniably handsome but distinctly different. The whispered conversations among the household staff and neighboring families grew more frequent. Everyone could see the obvious differences between the twins, but no one dared speak openly about what those differences might mean. It was during this period that William began to question his place in the family. He was intelligent enough to notice the way people looked at him, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the obvious favoritism that Charles showed toward Thomas. "Mother," William said one day when he was 15, finding Eleanor in the garden, "why does father treat me differently than Thomas?" Eleanor's heart clenched at the pain in her son's voice. She had been dreading this conversation for years. "What do you mean, dear?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "You know what I mean," William replied, his voice carrying maturity that belied his years. "He looks at me like I'm not really his son." Eleanor set down her gardening shears and studied her son's face, so like her own, yet with features that reminded her painfully of the man she had loved and lost. "You are my son," she said finally. "That is the only truth that matters." "But am I his son?" William pressed. "Really?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Come with me," she said, leading William to a secluded part of the garden. Over the next hour, Eleanor told her son the truth, about her forbidden love for Samuel, about the night of passion that had resulted in his conception, about the impossible circumstances of his birth alongside his half-brother. William listened in stunned silence, his world reshaping itself around this new information. When Eleanor finished speaking, he sat quietly for several minutes, processing everything he had learned. "Samuel," he said finally, and it wasn't a question. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Samuel is your father." "Does he know?" "He suspects. We've never spoken of it directly, but—" "Yes, I believe he knows." William stood up slowly, his mind reeling with the implications. "What does this mean for me? For us?" "It means," Eleanor said, reaching out to take his hand, "that you are the product of love, even if that love was forbidden. It means that you have two fathers, one who gave you life and one who raised you. And it means that you must be very careful about who you trust with this knowledge." The revelation changed William's entire perspective on his life and his place in the world. He began to see Samuel in a new light, noticing the way the older man's eyes followed him with paternal pride, the subtle ways he tried to guide and protect him. Samuel, for his part, sensed the change in William's behavior toward him. The boy began seeking him out more frequently, asking questions about literature and philosophy, showing an interest in Samuel's thoughts and opinions that went beyond mere curiosity. One evening, when William was 17, he found Samuel alone in the library. "Samuel," William said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Yes, Master William," Samuel replied, though there was something different in his tone. "I know," William said simply. Samuel's hands stilled on the book he had been reading. "Know what, sir?" "I know that you're my father," The words hung in the air between them, a truth that had been unspoken for 17 years, finally given voice. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of secrecy and longing crash down upon him. "William," he said softly, using the boy's name without the formal title for the first time. "I want you to know," William continued, "that I'm proud to be your son. I've watched you all my life, seen your dignity and intelligence and kindness, and I've always wondered why I felt such a connection to you." Samuel felt tears streaming down his face, tears of joy and sorrow and overwhelming love for this young man who was his son in every way that mattered. "I have loved you from the moment you were born," Samuel whispered. "I have watched you grow into a fine young man, and I have been so proud, even though I could never say so." They embraced then, father and son finally acknowledging the bond that had always existed between them. It was a moment of pure joy in the midst of an impossible situation. But their newfound openness also brought new dangers. Charles had grown increasingly suspicious over the years, and William's obvious preference for Samuel's company did not go unnoticed. The tension reached a breaking point when William announced his intention to leave Magnolia Grove and seek his fortune elsewhere. "I want to go to Atlanta," he told Charles over dinner one evening. "I want to study law and make my own way in the world." Charles's face darkened with anger. "You'll do no such thing. Your place is here on this plantation, learning the family business." "Thomas can learn the family business," William replied calmly. "I have different interests." "Your interests are irrelevant," Charles snapped. "You are a Langford, and you will fulfill your obligations to this family." "Am I?" William asked quietly. "Am I really a Langford?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Charles's face went white with rage, and Eleanor felt her heart stop. "What did you say?" Charles whispered. "I think you heard me," William replied, his voice steady despite the danger he was courting. Charles stood up slowly, his hands clenched into fists. "You ungrateful bastard. After everything I've given you, everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" William laughed bitterly. "You've treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own home for my entire life. Because you're not my son," Charles exploded, finally giving voice to the truth that had poisoned their relationship for 17 years. The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor gasped, Thomas stared in shock, and William felt a strange sense of relief at finally hearing the truth spoken aloud. "I know," William said quietly. "I've known for years." Charles's rage reached a fever pitch. He turned on Eleanor with fury that had been building for nearly 2 decades. "You whore," he snarled. "You brought this bastard into my house and expected me to raise him as my own." "Charles, please," Eleanor begged, but he was beyond reason. "And you," Charles continued, turning his attention to Samuel, who had entered the dining room at the sound of raised voices. "You defiled my wife and created this abomination." Samuel stood tall in the face of Charles's fury, his dignity intact even in this moment of ultimate crisis. "I loved her," Samuel said simply, "and I love my son." The admission was the final straw for Charles. He lunged at Samuel with murderous intent, but William stepped between them. "Stop!" William shouted. "This has gone on long enough." The confrontation ended with William's departure from Magnolia Grove the next morning. He left with little more than the clothes on his back and a small sum of money that Eleanor had secretly given him. Samuel watched from the servants' quarters as the young man he loved as a son disappeared down the tree-lined drive, not knowing if he would ever see him again. William's departure from Magnolia Grove marked the beginning of a long period of silence that would stretch across decades. He made his way to Atlanta, where he found work as a clerk in a law office and began studying at night to earn his degree. His intelligence and determination served him well, and within a few years he had established himself as a promising young attorney. But William never forgot his origins or the family he had left behind. He wrote letters to his mother, carefully worded missives that spoke of his success, while avoiding mention of the circumstances that had driven him away. Eleanor treasured these letters, reading them until the paper grew soft with handling. Samuel aged rapidly in the years following William's departure. The joy that had briefly illuminated his life when his son acknowledged him was replaced by profound sadness that seemed to settle into his very bones. He continued to perform his duties with the same efficiency, but those who knew him well could see that something essential had gone out of him. Eleanor, too, was changed by the events of that terrible night. She withdrew from social activities, spending most of her time in the garden or in her room, emerging only when absolutely necessary. The vibrant woman who had once been the toast of Georgia society became a shadow of her former self. Charles threw himself into the business of running the plantation with renewed vigor, as if he could somehow erase the shame of his family's scandal through sheer force of will. He expanded the operation, acquired new land, and became one of the most successful planters in the region. But his success felt hollow, built as it was on the foundation of a broken family. Thomas inherited the plantation when Charles died in 1925, and he proved to be an able manager of the family's affairs. But he too carried the weight of family secrets, and as he aged, he became obsessed with documenting the family history, including the mysterious circumstances surrounding his brother's birth. It was Thomas who preserved the photograph that had been taken just days after the twins' birth, along with detailed family records that would later prove crucial to understanding the truth. He also maintained correspondence with William, who had moved to New York and established a successful law practice there. William never married, never had children, but he carried with him the knowledge of his true parentage and a burning curiosity about the medical impossibility of his birth. He spent years researching cases of unusual pregnancies, corresponding with doctors and scientists, trying to understand how such a thing could have happened. Samuel lived out his days at Magnolia Grove, growing old in service to a family that had given him both the greatest joy and the deepest sorrow of his life. He died in 1943, taking his secrets with him to the grave, but not before leaving behind a detailed journal that would later prove crucial to understanding the truth. The journal, written in Samuel's careful hand, documented not only his love for Eleanor and his relationship with William, but also his observations about the unusual circumstances of the twins' birth. As an intelligent man who had spent his life observing and learning, Samuel had developed his own theories about what had happened. Theories that would prove remarkably prescient when science finally caught up with the truth. Eleanor passed away in 1945, her final words a whispered apology to a love she had never been able to acknowledge publicly. She was buried in the Langford family cemetery, her grave marked with a simple stone that gave no hint of the extraordinary story she had lived. Thomas died in 1967, leaving behind a treasure trove of family documents and records that his descendants would inherit along with the plantation. The property itself was eventually sold and converted into a museum, but the family papers remained in private hands for decades. William lived until 1978, dying peacefully in his New York apartment, surrounded by books and papers that documented his lifelong quest to understand his own origins. He left behind a substantial estate and a collection of research that would eventually find its way to academic institutions interested in unusual medical cases. The mystery of the Langford twins might have died with them, buried beneath decades of Southern discretion and family shame. But in 1995, Dr. Sarah Chen, a geneticist at Emory University, was researching historical cases of unusual pregnancies when she came across the Langford family records. "Doctor," Chen had been studying the phenomenon of heteropaternal superfecundation, the rare occurrence of twins having different fathers, when a colleague mentioned the Langford case. Intrigued by the historical documentation and the unusual circumstances described in the family papers, she decided to investigate further. What drew me to the Langford case initially was the quality of the documentation. Dr. Chen explained to the documentary crew that had come to film her research. Most historical cases of unusual pregnancies are poorly documented, but the Langford family had preserved an extraordinary amount of detail about the circumstances surrounding the birth of these twins. The photograph, the birth records, the family journals, and Samuel's detailed account all pointed to something that seemed impossible by 1891 standards, but was perfectly explainable by modern science: heteropaternal superfecundation. The phenomenon occurs when a woman releases multiple eggs during ovulation and has sexual contact with different partners within a short time frame, Dr. Chen explained. Each egg can be fertilized by sperm from a different father, resulting in twins who are actually half-siblings. The genetic testing that Dr. Chen performed on hair samples from the family's preserved belongings confirmed what had been suspected for over a century. Thomas and William Langford were indeed half-brothers, sharing a mother but having different fathers. The Langford case is remarkable not because of the biology involved, Dr. Chen continued, but because of the social and historical context. In 1891, this family was living with a scientific reality that wouldn't be understood or explained for another 100 years. The revelation made headlines around the world, sparking discussions about race, class, love, and the complex realities of human biology. The photograph of Eleanor with her two babies, flanked by both possible fathers, became an icon of the complicated truths that lie beneath the surface of even the most carefully constructed social facades. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story was not the scientific explanation, but the human one. In an era when love across racial lines was not just forbidden but deadly, two people had found each other and created life in the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable. The discovery also shed new light on the experiences of enslaved people in the antebellum South, revealing the complex relationships and hidden histories that existed within the plantation system. Samuel's journal, in particular, provided insights into the inner life of an enslaved person that historians had rarely been able to access. Samuel Washington was clearly an extraordinary individual, noted Dr. Marcus Williams, a historian at the University of Georgia who studied the Langford papers. His journal reveals a man of remarkable intelligence and dignity who managed to maintain his humanity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances. The Langford Plantation still stands today, now a museum that tells the story of the Old South with all its complexities and contradictions. Visitors can see the garden where Eleanor and Samuel first confessed their love, the room where the twins were born, and the photograph that captured a moment of impossible truth. The museum's exhibits place the Langford story in its proper historical context, exploring the realities of plantation life for both enslaved and free people. The story of Eleanor, Samuel, and their children serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of slavery and the complex relationships that existed within that system. The Langford story is ultimately about love, said Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the museum's chief curator. It's about people finding connection and creating meaning in circumstances that were designed to dehumanize and divide them. It's a story that resonates across time because it speaks to fundamental truths about human nature. The scientific explanation for the twins' different parentage has also contributed to medical understanding of heteropaternal superfecundation. While still rare, the phenomenon is now recognized and understood by the medical community, and genetic testing has revealed that it occurs more frequently than previously thought. The Langford case was one of the first well-documented historical examples of heteropaternal superfecundation, noted Dr. Chen. It helped us understand that this phenomenon has been occurring throughout human history, even when we didn't have the scientific knowledge to explain it. The story has also inspired numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies, each exploring different aspects of the Langford family's extraordinary experience. The photograph that started it all continues to fascinate viewers, serving as a window into a moment when science, society, and human emotion collided in the most dramatic way possible. Today, the descendants of the Langford family continue to grapple with the legacy of their ancestors' choices. Some have embraced the story as a testament to the power of love to transcend social barriers, while others struggle with the complicated emotions that such a history inevitably brings. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past, said Robert Langford, Thomas's great-grandson, who now serves on the museum's board of directors. But it's also a story about courage and love, and the ways that people can find each other, even in the most impossible circumstances. The Langford case has also contributed to ongoing discussions about race, identity, and family in American society. The story of two boys who shared a mother but had different fathers, one white, one black, speaks to the complex realities of racial identity in a society built on rigid categories and hierarchies. The scientific explanation for their birth has also raised questions about other historical cases that might have been misunderstood or misinterpreted. Researchers are now looking back through historical records, searching for other examples of unusual pregnancies that might be explained by modern genetic science. The Langford case has opened up new avenues of research, said Dr. Chen. We're finding that many historical mysteries can be explained by phenomena that we now understand, but that were unknown to previous generations. The story of Eleanor Langford and her two sons serves as a reminder that truth really is stranger than fiction, and that the human heart has always found ways to transcend the barriers that society erects. It's a story about love and loss, about secrets and revelations, about the ways that science can illuminate the mysteries of the past. But most of all, it's a story about the enduring power of human connection to create meaning and beauty, even in the most challenging circumstances. The photograph that captured that impossible moment in 1891 continues to speak to us today, reminding us that love, in all its forms, has always found a way to flourish even when the odds seemed insurmountable. This incredible true story shows us that truth really is stranger than fiction. The Langford family lived with a mystery for over a century before science could finally provide answers. Eleanor's impossible choice between duty and love created a scientific phenomenon that wouldn't be understood for another 100 years. What makes this story even more remarkable is how it challenges everything we think we know about the past. In an era of rigid social boundaries and deadly consequences for crossing racial lines, love found a way to create something beautiful and impossible. If this story fascinated you as much as it did us, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We dive deep into the most incredible true stories that shaped our world. Stories of love, science, and the extraordinary ways that human beings have always found to transcend the limitations of their time. Share this video with someone who loves history, science, or just incredible human stories, because some truths are too amazing not to share. What do you think about Eleanor's impossible choice? Could you have made the same decision in her circumstances? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to check out our other videos about the hidden mysteries of American history. From forgotten love stories to scientific breakthroughs that changed everything we thought we knew about the past, we're here to bring you the most incredible true stories that time forgot. Until next time, remember, the most amazing stories are often the ones that really happened.